I'm the oldest and my parents were like,
I saw that the big backhoe was moved over, so I assumed there was issues. Yeah. Did the account go through? Because I picked up a credit at that place. And Janet or Phyllis were there. Are we recording?
I just use my credit card.
Yeah. Hey, how you doing? Good. Yeah, so we'll end up having an account there. That's good. Yeah. And let's put it on the account. Good. I saw that it was. Don't do that.
But it went fine today. It went well.
Good. Good. You ready? Let's call the meeting to order. I'm going to say from our stands. Start with roll call.
Chair Thorpe,
Here.
Vice Chair Griva, Board Member Rodriguez,
Here.
Board Member Wood. Here. Board Member White.
Here. I'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, public comments from the audience regarding items not on the agenda. This portion of the agenda allows an individual the opportunity to address the GSA on any items not on closed session, consent calendar, public hearings, and agency business. Under state regulations, no action can be taken on non-agenda items, including issues raised under this agenda item. Members of the public should be aware of this when addressing the GSA regarding items not specifically referenced on this agenda. Please be further aware that public comments can also be submitted via email. Is there any public comments on items not on the agenda?
Nothing.
Okay,
I'm not seeing any raised hands.
I don't see any either. Okay, consent calendar. All matters listed under consent calendar are considered routine and may be approved by one action of the agency unless a request for removal or discussion or explanation is received prior to the time the agency votes on the motion to adopt. We have one item. It would be the adoption of the minutes of the November 26th GSA meeting. We have a motion to adopt the minutes.
I so move.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Okay, next item of business, approve Arroyo Seco Groundwater Sustainability Agency Arroyo Seco Management Area Inventory of Rural Well Water Quality. Staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Give me a moment. Let's see if we can get technology to work here. I can get technology to work. Okay. Not too bad. I've got a slide deck that was prepared by Gus Yates. It's the same slide deck that went to your advisory committee. Just so we can kind of start from a level playing field. When we first developed the Arroyo Seco GSA's groundwater sustainability plan, one of the elements that we wove into it was to look at rural water quality in the Arroyo Seco Cone area, thinking that there might be, excuse me, an opportunity to do some consolidation or a few other different approaches to helping get good quality water throughout all of the rural area. And then as we rolled into combining that potential set of actions or developing at least that initial report, we put it together as a management action in the GSP for the forebay. So the forebay had one of the management actions, if you'll recall, that's how we did the Arroyo Seco River Watershed Protection Policy. That was one of them. Another management action was to look at rural water quality and to just do an initial look at it with the eye towards potentially someday trying to put some things together to bring improved water quality to some areas, not all, clearly. It's, if we look at the entire forebay, which we'll see here in a minute, it's pretty widely distributed. So the fact that it was in the forebay, GSP, the Salinas Valley Basin GSA included that management action in its last grant application. So we got grant money to actually conduct the study. You recall your board directed me to make sure that Gus Yates, our consultant, did the work. He did. And I'm going to present more or less a summary view for you today. It's in your packet. I'll characterize it as no real earth-shattering new news. It's pretty much what we expected. We see nitrates in some areas. We've got less dissolved minerals in the Arroyo Seco Cone than we do on the east side of the forebay. One thing that Gus did do is he expanded the study to kind of capture all of the domestic wells that he could, rural domestic wells in the forebay, and included some in the upper valley. So we've got a little bit bigger slice. It's probably a better study just having all that information in one spot. So, I think that's a good thing to do. The objectives were to look at all these domestic wells, get an idea of where they were, how deep they were, compile all that data, and then look at some concentration data for all of the various constituents that we were concerned about. Clearly, one of the biggest constituents that we're concerned about is nitrates, given the agricultural utilization of water and fertilizers that we have in the forebay. And such, it's just one of the artifacts that we have to deal with. Okay, so as I mentioned, he took a bigger slice than just the Arroyo Seco Cone Management Area, included all the forebay and a good part of the upper valley. You can see King City, and you can see all of the little blue dots that are scattered throughout the forebay and the upper part of the upper valley. Those are the locations of the like well lot or whatever geographic information that he could grab and locate a well upon. So, and then Gus and his team went through well logs and all the data that he could pull together, but it gives you an idea of the distribution, which is pretty broad throughout the area, and the location of all of them. Quick summary, and this is in your report as well, all the data sources. So, Gus and his team scraped and scoured all the publicly available information sources that they could to put this together. We even worked a little bit with the Community Water Center in Sacramento. They had some interesting data, which I think I have a picture of, I'll save for later. But they did participate in helping us find information about water quality of these rural wells in our area and region. So, not all this data shows up in one spot, then it's all like easy to do. So he has to match all the data, right? It's just not matched for him. So they have to look at well locations and the well logs and the water quality, and he has to figure out where it all came from. They did a great job. One of the first things that I'd like you to note is that most of the wells for domestic use are shallower, not as deep as the irrigation wells for agriculture. That shouldn't be a surprise. Many of the wells for agriculture are deep for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that wanting to have a nice large zone which they can draw water from to be able to pump at higher rates. So this diagram essentially gives you a snapshot. It shows you what the range of those well depths are, and then gives you the some of the median data is shown in a line. So these are nice little bar charts that give you that information snapshot. Not surprising also is that there's not a huge variation in the well depths, because that's where the water is. What it also tells us is that during drought conditions, the domestic wells are going to feel the drawdowns before some of the irrigation wells. And that'll be a concern for us in terms of management issues in the future. But it's something to be, aware of now. What do we look at? Nitrates, alkalinity, chromium, dissolved solids, 1, 2, 3. Trichloropropane, also known as TCP. That's the one volatile organic was found in one location. Up the Arroyo Seco River watershed, I guess it would be west and south of Greenfield, maybe west and north. How the valley's kind of cantered. West and south, I think is right. But found out it may be due to an abandoned landfill, might be the source, something to gives us a little, like a check mark to continue to study, to figure out in the future. Generally low in terms of, things like boron and chromium and fluorides and pH. Although we do have some uncommonly high nitrate issues. Like I said, there is some TCP, but very small amounts. And this gives you just a kind of a scatter plot of nitrates. The green dots are 0 to 15. Yellow dots are 30 to 45. And the kind of orange reddish dots are over 45. And the 30 to 45 ranges are concerned because they're in excess of the MCLs. Something to be cognizant of going forward. You might note that there appears to be kind of a ring of nitrate contamination around the city of Greenfield. Perhaps Mr. Thorpe would have the most of the answer off the top of his head, being part of Clark Colony. Clark Colony's been around a long time, was part of the beginning of Greenfield, a lot more agriculture for a lot longer time period. It didn't surprise me to see that little ring of nitrates around Greenfield because of our history here. Again, another concentration around King City, I think for the same reasons. So our primary MCL, is at 45. That's where we're really concerned. Fortunately, most of the rural wells are below that. That's a good news, but we do see plenty of them above, and that's a concern going forward that we'll need to continue to work on. And if you will, that's really one of the reasons why we did this to start with, was to get our arms around where these problematic wells were and to see if there's any way to consolidate them or provide them other water supply sources. TCP, the one red dot that's on this graphic, it's on the left-hand side, kind of, it is south and west, or, yeah, south and west of the city. That's the former landfill, abandoned area. And that's the likely source. Again, it's something that we'll need to do more work on in the future. Chlorides, kind of a mixed bag, but again, fairly high around the city. Again, we've got a secondary MCL, something that's a concern in terms of water quality, a fair amount of contamination. But the conclusions, the problematic constituents, chloride hardness, especially on the east side, nitrates, sulfates, total dissolved solids, and TCP. Nitrate was the only constituent with an apparent increasing trend. That's because, the application of nitrate takes time to percolate down through the ground. It transitions from ammonia to nitrate to become a problem, and it takes decades for that to occur. And, we see the rural wells are pretty well distributed throughout the region with some of those clusterings that we mentioned. Potential annexations to the city water supply system may be an opportunity to do some consolidations. That's not a hard and fast recommendation. That's something that needs to be worked on. I know city manager and I have had kind of some rudimentary discussions about that. It's not a straightforward process, but it's something that we can work on in the future to help provide better water quality to some of the areas. Kind of an immediate opportunity for providing improved water quality would be to put in point of use units, under the sink RO units for folks that for drinking water right on, and most folks have them in their kitchens. I have one in my kitchen. I've got a well, and it's a good way to improve water quality at a reasonable cost. And then, long-term monitoring is probably being able to identify local patterns and give us an idea of how we might want to address that in the future. And that, Mr. Chairman, is the summary of the study. Now, if I can stop sharing. Did I stop sharing? Yeah. Oh, yes. Success.
Okay, is there any public comments?
I don't see any raised hands.
I don't see any either. Okay, agency comments, board members, questions?
I do have one quick question, Curtis. The reverse osmosis system, does that deal with nitrates, or is it something?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Does the reverse osmosis process, does that deal with nitrates, or?
Oh, yeah, it takes all that out.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, the reverse osmosis that you can buy in those units that stick under your sink, they've got pretty solid membranes. And so they'll take out, most of the metal ions, they'll take out chloride, they'll take out sodium, they'll certainly take out nitrate. It's a pretty good sized molecule, yeah.
Okay.
I have something.
Yeah,
Around a year ago, I was at a meeting in the county chambers, and they were talking about a camp right outside of Greenfield, Camp Mercado, which is trailer homes. And they were talking about some serious water issues they were having there. And when you talk of reverse osmosis, can something like that be used for a neighborhood like that?
oh yeah, because the point of use RO units go in each individual unit and go underneath the sink in your kitchen, and it provides them reasonable cost drinking water. They're a couple $100. I mean, they're not overly expensive, and they're fairly easy to install. If I can do it myself without them leaking, almost anybody can.
Sounds good.
It's not a complete solution. It'll only, they're relatively small units. They're not high throughput. They're usually not used on the whole house. They're usually used just in the application under the sink so they can provide drinking water. That's the drawback. To do one for like the whole community, that's a much larger lift because every time you run water through one of these RO units, you have some reject. In the case of under the sink, that reject goes into the sewer, becomes part of either the, septic tank or whatever, especially in small rural settings. Trying to provide a larger distribution system from, say, the city to serve these folks has a number of issues associated with land use, with planning, frankly, with some of the politics. So all that needs to be worked out if that's the kind of solution that we want to work through. It's not just a straightforward, we'll run a pipeline out and serve you.
Gotcha. And Paul Wood, I'm remembering that meeting I went to. I wasn't there for that issue, but what's the agency called that controls the county growth? LAFCO, there we go. So they brought it up and they talked about it and it sounded pretty serious.
I'm sure it was.
And they didn't talk much about solutions, but that was over a year ago, Paul. Was there any advancement or any work on that?
Yeah, I don't want to open up a can of worms. But they looked at two communities, one at the west end of Apple Avenue, and then one north of 12th, right? And they looked at a number of properties along, is it Apple? No, I'm sorry, Walnut Avenue, not Apple. Apple, we just actually did extend the city water out to the Middlestead and Rocha properties up there. They were looking to do the same thing or something similar for those properties, which gets into the myriad of issues, land use issues that Curtis was talking about. I think the biggest issue that was facing the county, because those are not in the incorporated area of Greenfield, it's in county jurisdiction, is they had a water supply grant for those areas that was sunsetting. And so the money was running out to supply water via a grant. And I don't know what they were planning to do after that grant ran out. Yeah.
Okay.
So did they find an answer? I'm not sure. The California Water Coalition is the people that were working on their behalf. CWC, you want to talk to them.
Gotcha.
Some of the solutions could be, drilling a new well. If their existing well is relatively shallow, perhaps it's in a, plume where they've got nitrates or other constituents. I don't know what the exact contaminants are in those wells. I suspect it's nitrates. Moving the location, even in a different part, in the trailer park, might be a solution. But as we know, wells, a couple, 300-400 feet deep, are not inexpensive. Whereas these units that can be underneath the sink are relatively inexpensive units and can provide pretty high quality water for folks to drink. So, that's a solution that probably will be implemented a lot more than drilling new wells. Some of it, you saw the distribution. Some of these individual houses or farmhouses or whatever are way the heck away from any city. So it's going to be a challenge to manage all those individual locations without having some fairly inexpensive fix. And, as Gus pointed out, I've also made similar recommendations in other communities where we're looking to improve water quality and looking to do so relatively inexpensively.
Okay.
Sure.
So you guys have expanded the city water supply out to like 13th and a half.
Yes, on the Apple.
On Apple Avenue, yeah.
Only, yes.
Right, that's about a quarter of a mile from the property we're talking about. Right.
And the school's there, the school, right up there.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
It's interesting that Board Member Rodriguez identified the individual organization, LAFCO, which has, they bring it up, but they don't have any kind of authority. I'm just pointing out, and then the particular park, development is within the county's jurisdiction, not the city's. So, you got three organizations, only one of which has got land use, none of which has got an obligation to supply water. It's frankly one of the artifacts sometimes that we have as a result of allowing developments to occur without having the proper infrastructure and frankly, institutional structure in place to be able to serve them. So it's, they're not easy nuts to crack, but there are some inexpensive temporary solutions that can be employed.
What's interesting is that on Oak Avenue, right before our Patriot Park, there's a 3-acre property there for sale that has its own well. So that means that there are wells, private wells within city limits. I didn't realize that, but are there many?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
There's probably more than you think. On Oak Avenue, where my grandmother's property was, there's a private well there. There's another one on 13th and Oak. There's probably more than you realize.
Are those,
There's probably some out towards the Rosa Camp and over on that side too.
Oh, yeah.
are those developed properties?
No,
Okay. So
right, they're
that's
not,
gonna be
they're
the-
undeveloped properties. Right.
So they would create their own wells when they built their house.
Yeah, some of them are probably 60 or 70 years old.
All right, sounds
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, your action today would be to approve the study so that we can now route this out as one of our management actions and provide it to the Salinas Valley Basin GSA, so they can in turn approve it and submit it to DWR. So that's our proposed action today.
Okay, any more questions or comments from board members? Then we need a motion to approve the plan.
Move to approve.
A second.
Then moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion's carried. Next order of business, receive Arroyo Seco Groundwater Sustainability Agency General Manager's Status Report.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I always like to include some sort of report so we can keep current, keep talking about things. I'm going to use the first piece of this just kind of as administrative element. As part of being a GSA, we have certain obligations relative to, legal, ethical standards. And the Fair Political Practices Commission, I think I got that right, wants us all to fill out Form 700s. I've given the FPPC all of your email addresses, and you should be getting contacted to go through and submit your individual Form 700. That's just a heads up, to let you know that I did that. It's just something in the public that we have to do. I don't know if our esteemed council has any input on that one.
No, I mean, it's, you should have already received it, so if you haven't, let us know. I know that I've gotten mine, so that's why you should have gotten yours. And it is relatively easy to fill out, so.
Well, they've always have filled out their Form 700, but it's been on paper. Now we have to go electronic.
Yeah. So that's the administrative piece. On the technical side, in terms of implementation of our GSP, yesterday we had a 4-bay implementation subcommittee meeting here. And, we were going through, I went through this with the 4-bay subcommittee, so they were aware of it. We talked about process. But we got a fairly long presentation from the Salinas Valley Basin GSA staff about what's going to happen in the coming year. And there's a number of items that are starting to roll out. But maybe one that is not fully, I'll call it cooked, is the fact that, next year we'll be rolling into developing our own update of the 4-Bay GSP. So that'll be coming, and 5 years rolls around pretty doggone quick. So, because we'll be submitting in January of 2027, so that's not that far away. So, I just want to give you a heads up, get ready, strap in, we're going to, go on another bumpy ride. And along that kind of general theme, the Technical Advisory Committee is looking at trying to revise many of the sustainability management criteria, the SMCs. And groundwater elevations is a big one because they're used to trigger any kind, triggers a bad source. We're trying to get away from triggers. They're supposed to, be points where actions are taken, flagged or whatever phraseology we want to use. The point is, if groundwater elevations fall too far, there are likely to be actions, both management and otherwise, incurred. And one of the ones that can be used throughout the basin, all of the subbasins, would be demand management. And so we got into kind of a broad discussion, and I did note that during the last drought, there were in fact demand management actions taken in the 4-Bay as a practical matter, because as groundwater elevations fell, there were a number of agricultural wells were above the actual groundwater elevation and were unable to pump, period. And in many of those that still had their bowls deep enough to pump, because the head was larger, there was less water available. So there was a fairly noticeable and recorded decrease in the amount of water pumped. If we get into another prolonged drought, something like that may be more formalized going forward. And to that end, the Technical Advisory Committee has been looking at groundwater elevations. They've developed a pretty good process, but in the 4-Bay, they've only used the last 30 years. In the last 30 years, this last drought was pretty significant. And if you group those 30 years together, it appears that we have kind of a downward trend in groundwater elevations. I mentioned this to you back in November. And so one of the comments that I made yesterday, and I think that the Technical Advisory Committee will be looking at, will be increasing the period of review for the 4-Bay. Because we have gotten a number of wells that have got 50 years plus worth of service, and we have hydrographs to be able to support them. So I think we have a much longer period of time which to be able to develop trends. Some of the subbasins don't have that ability, or if they use that ability, their trend would look worse. So I think the 30 years was kind of taken as a pretty long period of time, granted, but I've requested the Technical Advisory Committee to look at a longer period for the 4-Bay, and to also acknowledge some of the operational changes that occurred with the operation of the reservoirs, in particular, during this last drought. You'll recall there were a couple of years where no releases were made at all, even though there was water available. And that's a significant change in the way in which the reservoirs have been operated in the past. So there's the reason why I bring this all up is that one of the outcomes will be, if we see a long-term downward trend in groundwater elevations, we're going to get to a point where some sort of action needs to be taken. Currently, the thinking of the Technical Advisory Committee is 75%, of the height. If we lose 25% of the measurable objective, that's the high one, that's where we want to start taking action. So those kinds of decisions will be coming to you ultimately in the next round of our GSP development. But they're already starting to work on it, and it's something to consider. But that also engendered a larger discussion about demand management and how that's likely to play out within the Salinas Valley. Different demand management strategies in different subbasins, if needed at all, is likely to be what happens. But know that demand management will continue to be on the table for actions for help managing groundwater basins in the Salinas Valley. It's also important to note that any wet water projects, I mean real water projects, are going to take time, maybe decades to develop. And DWR has already shown that in some of the Central Valley areas, they've not allowed the answer to be, well, it's coming, we'll get it done in 10 years. It is, no, you need to start doing demand management now while you're developing your solutions. So it'll be interesting to see how DWR responds to the current pressure zone submittal that went in this last January, went in this last month, with their 5-year update. So Director Wood was also there. Do you have any comments on yesterday's meeting?
No.
Like, cover enough of it?
Yeah, and I did, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of input related to the demand management issue and how the Upper Valley and the Forebay are both deemed sustainable at this point, but the demand management issue is going to affect us as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a tool in all of the subbasins toolkit. How it's used, is still up in the air. In fact, it's still up in the air for the whole valley. I mean, the presentation made by the staff of the Salinas Valley Basin GSA acknowledged that, at this point they've done workshops, but they haven't really implemented any demand management throughout any of the other subbasins as well. And that, you also recall, there is a white paper that's in the process of being developed to potentially look at some of the water rights issues associated with demand management. Not all of the demand management methods will have impact on water rights, and some more than others. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Something to be aware of, that I want you all to be aware of. And I think that's enough of a bite on the GM report today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Let's go out to public comments.
Mr. Versick,
Mr. Versick?
please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair and General Manager Weeks. Tom Versick speaking. So I don't need to add to Mr. Weeks's synopsis of the meeting. I think that's pretty fair summary. What I will add, for whatever it may be worth, is my observation about all the probation activity in the Central Valley, which involves the State Water Resources Control Board as well as DWR. And some basins are in probation already. There's litigation, and others may or may not get there. But there's a lot of reports, a lot of staff things that occur in Sacramento, and I make a point to look at as many as I can. And it seems that absolutely categorically, demand management or some term that is similar to that is absolutely required from a staff level pretty much everywhere. And it doesn't have to be implemented necessarily, but what the staff seems to not like is when it comes across as strictly voluntarily. That's something I look for in staff reports, is how they characterize those things. I do think also that is not a fatal impediment to the two southern basins, because there can be demand management protocols that can meet the thresholds the state wants and not necessarily be, shoved down people's throats. There are ways to manage this. And the fact that the interests in Upper Valley and the Four Bay, but for this purpose, the Four Bay meeting, there were lots of active members on the committee and from the public suggesting, noting, being a part of it. And that, I think, is excellent sign for getting whatever form of demand management needs to be at least in a plan, if not actually implemented in place. So the direction is overall, you should be happy you are where you are as opposed to somewhere else. Let's just put it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Versick.
And thank you, Mr. Versick. I concur with your recollections. You did put a finer point on where DWR is at, and I agree with you 100%. So I thank you for that, and I also thank you. I am happy where I'm at, so hopefully we'll continue to be there.
Okay, is there any more public comment?
I don't see any, Mr. Chairman.
I do not see any. Questions or comments from the board?
I do have a comment not related to the issues that we just spoke about, but I got a hold of these annual reports, one from the Monterey Peninsula Management District that sent out a nice report to, I guess, every household in Monterey County. I got one. And then I got one titled The Journey of Water from the Sky. And this is by MCSI Water Systems Management, that I imagine every household got in Greenfield as well. Now, obviously, water availability has been in the news lately due to the fires in Southern California. And that's been interesting just listening to what the public believes. And I think it was last fall, I got this simple pamphlet from our local high school district explaining about the bond that they actually passed. So I bring them just to mention to the board a possibility of, in the future, we put something out like that. Because I think with the Mercado issue and perhaps other issues, they might mistake what our role is. And I think it's a good time for at least the residents in Greenfield to be aware of who we are and the different agencies that work with water and how we're working for the residents and for everybody else around Greenfield. So that's something to consider.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Okay. We don't need to take any action on this. Just receive and file.
Just received.
Okay, receive and file, and be no more agency business, we'll adjourn the meeting.